Greetings! It is I, Countess Nara Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the EARTHDAWN Roleplaying game system. Well, where we last left off, we were talking about combat. Today I'm going to talk about mounted combat, riding upon your beast or animal into battle. So, mounted combat is actually quite common in the world of EARTHDAWN. There is in fact specific magics that have been developed allowing for discipline all about riding a creature into battle that has been developed. The Cavalryman. When we talk about mounted combat, we are referring to both the rider, which is the one riding upon the animal, the mounted one, and the animal itself, the mounted creature, the mount. So we have the mounted and the mount. And most of the combat rules for mounted combat are just the same as the combat rules we discussed before. Only the exceptions I'll be discussing today are the ones that will differentiate itself between these two types of combat. Now, a mount will have an amount of training that revolves around how well it will do in combat. The more training it has, the better the mount will actually be able to be working with you within combat. There are some exceptions, the fact that cavalrymen and certain other groups, disciplines, have abilities that will help when it comes to this. Generally speaking, though, when we are talking about mounts in combat, there are three classifications. First off is untrained, meaning this creature has no training whatsoever. An untrained creature basically is unfamiliar with people even dealing with it. So riding into combat, it's going to be wary of combat, it's going to be wary of you, it's going to be difficult to control. It's not used to you as a name giver jumping on its back and riding it around. Now next up is trained. Now when we talk about trained, we're talking about just a trained animal. This would be the horse that would take you around town, or that you put in front of a wagon. They are trained more for riders. They are better suited to being the general pack animals / riding animals that you're used to. This is not trained for combat. And again, it will be spooked or wary when it comes to combat. The last one, though, is combat trained. That means it specifically is used to the sounds, the smells, the experience of battle, and can also be there to assist you in battle in a way. It's been trained to be side by side with a person within combat. Now, mounting an animal is a standard action normally. If it is an untrained mount, then you have to make a trick riding test to see if you are successfully able to do that. Once you are mounted, of course, you can do everything you need to do. If you need to dismount, it is a simple action. Now, when it comes to close combat, you can leap off of your mount, or you can attempt to leap off and grapple an opponent from your mount. Regardless, at this point in time, you will take a 5/1d8 step damage from the fall coming off of the mount. If you successfully make a grapple against the target that you're attempting to leap and grapple down upon, they will also take that 5/1d8 damage from the fall. You impact into them and deal the damage to both of you. Now, if a mount is knocked down, you as the rider are automatically knocked down as part of it. You will then take that 5/1d8 falling damage as if you were falling off the mount. Well, leaping off the mount in that case, you will take some damage. If you are knocked down from the mount, you are fallen off. Your mount itself is fine. It is unaffected by that. You'll once again take that 5/1d8, but you yourself will be the only one as part of this that is knocked down. Now, some characters may have abilities that help them against knockdown, whether magical or racial. The thing is, it will depend on the race, the magical ability. They might not work when you're mounted. So you will have to worry about the fact that your stability against being knocked down might not function. It will be up to the game master to determine what abilities of your own that will help you to stay stable will actually work while you're on top of an animal. It might be that you're better when you're standing on the ground, and if you're just sitting there, it doesn't help you whatsoever. Now, the combat sequence itself, when we dive into that, is pretty much the same between mounted combat and normal combat. There isn't really any difference between the sequences. Once we discuss it, that the rider and the mount, both of them actually get their own sets of actions. Each will take their own standard actions. The mount will act upon the rider's initiative. The exception is an untrained mount, which will have its own initiative and own actions. It will not be listening to the rider most of the time, unless the rider can do a lot to basically convince it to do what you want to. It's not ready for this. So combat on an untrained mount can be difficult at the best of times or impossible at the worst of times, because it is an independent creature and you just have to convince it what you want it to do. Now, if a mount is separate from the rider at the beginning of combat, it will declare its own actions at the beginning of this turn. Once the rider mounts onto it, they do act as one. Its initiative changes to the rider's initiative, but it does not get any additional actions or changes of actions. It would either continue with the action it was going to do, or the rider will effectively cancel that out. The exception is if it hasn't used any actions. Effectively, as long as it hasn't done whatever it was going to do, it may have actions open, but you'll be changing actions and have to use those rules in particular. If it has used up its actions, it's, well, used up its actions. Now, mount and a rider are treated as one creature when it comes to movement, and you'll be using the mount's movement. Now, if a mount is already moved and a rider dismounts, he doesn't get any additional movement. It's assumed that there's focus on the togetherness, that keeping the mount in line and where it's moving properly has kept the two of them in a sequence that they are, or it's used up all that effort that would be for making the movement. The rider's already used up all his focus on keeping this beast and the animal in line and keeping it on the movement that the rider wants the animal to be on. In addition, if you are unfamiliar with the mount that you're using, you have to make a trick riding test in order to spur the mount on during the sequence of combat. You're unfamiliar with keeping it going. Cavalry and Beastmasters tend to have some abilities to alleviate this. Now, running is an option for a mount. It would use up the mount's standard action. If a mount takes this, it gets harried and takes 1 strain. While using the split movement option, a rider will get harried and take 1 strain. So you can see that both of them have options to make the movement go faster that the two could split between. The fact is, you can actually get to a point where both of these are used in the same round. Both the run option for the mount and the split option for the rider. And both of them would be harried and get that 1 strain. You can technically use both together. Now, a charge action is a close combat action made by a mount involving its using of its powerful move to enhance the rider's attack. Effectively, a mount has to move more than its normal movement. It has to push itself a great distance, and then it would allow the rider to make a charge attack. You can only use a charging attack on a combat trained mount, or if you use a successful trick riding test with another type of mount. That test is against the mount's social defense. Most of these trick riding tests are against your mount's social defense. So it has to be in a relatively straight line, and the mount has to be using the running option. Mount running, straight line. You can use the split attack option as part of this, but again, it has to be a relatively straight line if you're doing that. A successful attack, as part of this charge action, you get to add your mount's strength step to your damage. You're effectively adding your mount strength, your own weapon hit against the target. Now, because of the high momentum, you have to worry about either getting thrown back or having your weapon thrown back. If you successfully charge, you make a strength test against the target's toughness step. If you're successful, you're fine. There are no ill effects. If you fail, the failure will depend on your weapon type. If you're using a long weapon, like a spear or a lance, then you will be knocked down off of your mount and suffer a 5/1d8 points of damage, like falling off before. If you're using a short-handed weapon, like a sword, then you will drop that weapon. Now, you can also use specific weapons made for mounted combat that are made to shatter. In that case, the weapons itself will shatter, and you will not have to worry about any kind of other ill effects. It will fall apart. You'll have what's left in your hand. If you use an unarmed strike, you don't have to worry about anything. That doesn't have any ill effects. Now, normally you can't make more than 1 attack as part of a charge action. This is for most of the abilities, the talents, and skills that you would use that would allow you to make multiple attacks. There are exceptions that there are specific talents that can be taken that would allow for one to make an extra attack as part of a charge. Those will allow it. The normal extra attacks, no. Now, the fact is, if 2 mounts are charging at each other and the riders hit each other, they will add both mounts' strength steps to each other. So that means if two people charging at each other hit each other, they're doubling the amount of strength. Well, not doubling, but they're adding both those strength steps to each of their attacks when dealing damage. So it can be very devastating for two to charge at each other. Now, it's important to note that in mounted weapons, you can use larger weapons than normal. You can use weapons with less hands than normal. The fact is that either because of your stance or because of hooks and stuff to your mount and everything around, there are exceptions that you can use weapons either one-handed, that would normally be two-handed, or slightly larger weapons. Now the fact is you need to have enough room to maneuver, usually an extra hex, or you have to have enough maneuver to charge. So either maneuvering around space, or you have to be charging with this for this to really be effective. If you are not, you get a penalty to your attack and damage equivalent to the size differences and the handed differences that you have. So it can be a very large penalty that you get if you're using this in a situation where things are really close to and you're trying to hit it up here when you really should have a little bit of distance to it. Now also as a standard action, you could have your mount make their natural attacks if they have a number of natural attacks to them. You could have them attack in place of you. This is specifically good for mounts trained in combat, where you direct them to do this. Ones that aren't trained in combat can use their natural attacks, but they aren't going to be controlled by you, and traditionally they're only going to attack something when they are specifically threatened. They will use their own steps and statistics for figuring out how their attacks are made. So, that's it for today. I talked about mounted combat. I talked all about mounted combat. The initiatives, getting on and off your horse, controlling your horse, its training. I talked about things like the combat sequence that you're going to have with your horse or the mount that you're riding, whatever type of creature it is. Talked about some special options like split movement and running. Talked about the charge attack, a special kind of attack that your mount can make. And I talked about specifically the results of that charge and a few other important details. I covered everything about mounted combat that you're going to need to know if you're a cavalryman or you're just someone that's going to be moving into mounted combat, even if you're not a cavalryman. In the next episode, we're going to cover aerial combat. Yep, that's the next one we want to cover. That's the big one after this because guess what? Sometimes your mount is flying and then the rules change completely. Or maybe you can fly and the rules change completely. Both of these things will alter the rules greatly, and we'll talk about that. But if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It shows support the channel, the empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, go check out my Patreon. Link description below. There's some great rewards there. It helps to grow and improve the channel and the empire. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.